our national identity?
That we've lost our national identity. Was our national identity ever that great, or did we genuinely ever have one? If it was about flat caps and whippets 50 years ago, or the fact that I would genuinely like to know what our national identity was ever, and if it was actually ever that great. Was it that we were a racist, backward-looking, nostalgic country in the 70s, or what? I mean, I think national identity will mean very different things depending on your gender, your race, your upbringing. Do we have and do we need to have shared values? That's important to every single society. And I think in this debate, the word multiculturalism in of itself does mean division, that there's all these different cultures that somehow don't integrate in any meaningful way and that there's no dialogue. And I think what has changed over the years is that there is more dialogue, and I think especially recently we've realised that we do need to have integration much more, and I think the problem has really always been integration. I also think that sometimes the word multiculturalism is actually just a byword for immigration, and I think that then gets we're actually having a conversation about how we distribute resources, and I think there's also a really big problem with that. People think that the welfare state is based on, your access to it is based on fairness, where it's actually not, it's based on need. So there always will be a family, maybe a family that's had to seek asylum, that has had to escape genocide, that will need a house more than you will, because you are a white working class family that chose to have 8 children when you only have a 2-bedroom council flat. So I think it's much more complicated than it actually, and I think we have to be really careful about the words that we use. So no one is against, I don't understand how anyone could be against knowing about different cultures and living amongst people with different cultures and different backgrounds. But I think actually what some people are against, the specific group that we're trying to, extremists that we're trying to target and look at and analyse, are actually people worried about immigration.
Okay. Jason, Theo, George, come back on Gemma's points there.
It's far more, I think, than a concern about immigration. And I think, I grew up in North London, and, you can clearly see how there are lines drawn in the sand between different communities, that communities of different ethnicities don't necessarily always interact with those around them. And there are clearly distinct groups who don't feel the need and don't actually, spread and don't actually integrate with the wider society. And I think that's where the muscular liberalism comes in, because it says, it's great that you've come from Turkey, or you've come from North Africa, and you have your wonderful traditions and your faith, and it's great that you practice that. However, please make an effort to sort of integrate with the wider society. And it's not the fault of these communities, far from it. Far from it. It's a fault of government, which simply has told them in the past, it's fine to do what you want. We don't want to know. Keep to your own devices, keep to your own communities, and, everyone can get on just fine. But what happens is, you create this friction between different communities and different groups, which breeds extremism, both within the actual ethnic group and within the wider British public, perhaps, which arguably is why the BNP has received so much support. So this friction that's created is what needs to be tackled. And you tackle that by opening up dialogue, by telling communities and British people that you can do more to work together and to integrate more effortlessly. And the government should be there to provide those sort of avenues.
That argument is slightly belied by the fact that if you look at the 7/7 bombers, for example, these were highly integrated individuals. These were people who played, who drank and had white girlfriends and played cricket and had no problem being, there was another reason why they wanted to kill people in London, and it wasn't to do with, I know what you mean about these communities, of Turks and Albanians and Somalis, and because we have lots of immigration, we have people at differential relations to the host culture. They've only just arrived.
But is it right for government to get involved in trying to bring these communities together, or should it just be left?
No, I personally don't think the government is very good at doing that kind of thing. But what it needs to do is provide services for these people and make sure, for example, that everyone has access to good bloody schools. And it's the same people, what we've allowed is our middle classes to opt out of our state services to such a degree that we've worsened the schools, we're getting rid of the libraries, we no longer use the same kinds of environments. That's what I want our government to provide, a minimal service. It's not going to be great, it's going to be minimal, based on, George Orwell's idea that we are a tolerant nation and that we have common sense. And those, those minimal requirements, I don't think the government can go much further than that.
So I think that's wrong, because I think services don't discriminate. You're not told when you go into the underground, you're not allowed to come in because you're wearing a turban. I mean, it's absurd.
No, that works brilliantly. That's
services discriminate. Of course they don't. That's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is government certainly has a place in helping communities, because if it doesn't, the communities think the government doesn't care.
Okay. Gemma, final word to you on this.
Just to come back on just the point about the 7/7 bombers, it wasn't that they weren't integrated in terms of culture, but because of them were sort of second or third generation, there was a point that they were actually marginalised by the fact that they had come from immigrant families, that they were struggling to move out. They don't think that they could afford to go to university. One of them couldn't afford to get married because of where their community was, where the immigrant community that had come from had settled, that they were actually sort of physically marginalised. They were marginalised from work, education, and that is a problem that we have, that somehow multiculturalism just disguises the real marginalisations that actually happen as a result of immigration.
Okay, Gemma, thank you very much. Fascinating chat there. Although I'm afraid we've come to the end of UniTalk Live this evening. Thank you very much for joining us here at the University of Westminster's television studios. Of course, you can watch back the show online if you go to www.smokeradio.co.uk. You'll be there to listen and to watch again. And
don't forget to tune into UniTalk next week, where we have a National Student Money Week special.
And if you'd like to get involved in that, please do send us an email at unitalk@smokeradio.co.uk.
But from everyone here, our live audience and our panellists,
good night.